Welcome to PwC Pulse, a podcast to provide insights to help you solve today's business challenges.
Hi, I'm Sean Joyce, Global Cybersecurity and Privacy Leader and U.S. Cyber Risk and Regulatory Leader here at PwC. I'm excited to welcome Deneen Defiore, Chief Information Security Officer at United Airlines, to the podcast. Today, we're diving into the world of cybersecurity and its growing importance to the C-suite and overall business strategy. We'll explore how leaders are collaborating across the organization so they can help put security at the epicenter of innovation. Deneen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Before we dive in, I've got some rapid fire questions to get to know you a little bit better. What is your favorite city in the world to visit?
I love lots of cities, but I think I like a small city in Belize. So Belize City is a nice place for me to be.
All right. What did you do in Belize?
We go there every year after Christmas, and I just like the culture and the vibe and the people. It's really nice to hang out there.
Nice. All right. What is the last movie you saw in a theater?
The Eras Tour. So I'm a Swiftie.
So you actually saw the Taylor Swift concert in the theater?
Yeah, and I saw it live too, and I'm going to watch it again on Disney Plus.
All right. My daughter is a Swiftie too. All right. Best binge series.
I like the British genre, so I really like The Crown or Downton Abbey. So those are the types of stuff I like to watch.
All right. A book that you would recommend to our listeners.
So I like to read things that take me out of reality, right? So I don't have to think about it. It's not real. It's not heavy or anything like that. So there's a great series. It's called the Fever series. It's like an urban fantasy that is based on Celtic folklore, which is pretty cool, and some historic fiction. So it's by Karen Marie Moning. So that's what I would recommend.
I got to check that out. All right, so let's get into this. You mentioned your journey, and I'm a little bit curious. Everyone sort of takes different paths. I started out in IT as sort of what we called a programmer back then. But looking across your career, it's very impressive across major companies like GE and United Airlines. Talk to us about how you started in not only your journey, but maybe helping some of the people out there. What are some of the unique challenges that you faced and how you dealt with them?
So, my journey into cybersecurity was probably not typical. I have a degree in biology. I kind of fell into technology through my work in graduate school from my studies there, and then moved into cyber, right place at the right time while I was in my technology career. And I think a lot of the lessons that I learned and that I take forward even to this day is that you have to be a lifelong learner, right? You have to be able to figure out how to learn new technologies, learn new concepts, understand everything that's going on in the pace that we work on with technology adoption and innovation. But that is not the only thing that you need to do. Just because you're good at your job and you're smart and you're knowledgeable, you really have to advocate for yourself around what you want to do and how you want to do it. I used to think early on in my career, I was doing great. I was getting great feedback. Everybody was saying, hey, you're really making a difference, whatever. But I wasn't where I wanted to be. And no one was going to get there except for myself. So I had a bit of a sponsorship and mentorship that helped me realize that. But in the end, you have to advocate for yourself and really be thoughtful and purposeful about what you want.
So you've been a Chief Information Security Officer for a while, and I am sure you've seen the role evolve over several years, especially considering the changes in tech that we've all seen. How would you like to actually see the role evolve? Not necessarily just how it has evolved, but how would you like to see it evolve in the next several years?
I think one of the most notable changes that we've seen and everybody is very familiar with is increased emphasis on risk management and governance. The capabilities and skill sets that CISOs need to demonstrate are really around that risk management and governance, not only of cybersecurity risk, but how that integrates into the comprehensive risk framework, like enterprise risk management framework of the business that they're in. We have to be way more proactive and forward-looking because, like you said, the pace of things that are evolving, the innovation, the technology technology landscape, the response to that with regulations, right? You really have to be able to see around corners. I think as we move forward, there's two things that have been on my mind. I think CISOs need to be really responsible for fostering the culture of cybersecurity and educating employees and stakeholders and partners at all levels of the organization around cyber threats and how their work and what they do on a day-to-day basis plays into the management and protection of that organization. That security conscious mindset. In my industry, I have a little bit of a luxury in the fact that we can relate cybersecurity with cyber safety. So that culture of safety in aviation has been there for the 100+ years that aviation has been a sector. So finding that and really making sure that everybody understands that it's their responsibility is really important and unique ways to be able to do that permeate that pervasive culture in your organization. The other thing, too, is that we still have work to do to have CISOs work more closely with the business units, their operations team and stakeholders, that they're integrated into the organization's products, processes, services, whatever it is, that the CISO department, office, whatever it is, organization is involved up front, whether it be development teams, operations teams, customer-facing organizations, really, again, playing off that cybersecurity culture, but really embedding cybersecurity into the way we do business.
No, those are great points. And you really talk about that, recognizing the multi-stakeholders within an organization. Tell me this, a lot of our listeners are in the C-suite, and we're talking from a CISO perspective and how that organization is leaning in. How would you actually talk to how the other side can lean in better?
Right. If you are sitting in the C-suite, if you're a CEO, COO, CFO, whatever that may be, you really have to think of cybersecurity as a business risk, which I think a lot of organizations are doing that now. They're recognizing that, and they're treating it as a strategic priority, integrating it into the ERM framework that they may have. But it's also important for the leaders, the senior leadership team, to make sure that they recognize that it's a holistic and cross-functional approach. It can't be siloed and delegated to the IT or technology department or even cybersecurity department. It really needs to be a collaboration, and everybody has to be on the same page across the operation, whether it be finance, legal, customer service, to really understand everybody's goals, priorities, outcomes to create a cybersecurity risk management strategy. So that's, I think, number one. And also that shift from the, I'll say, cost center, return on investment type of mentality to a strategic investment. It is like an insurance policy. So you have to kind of think about it like the same way you think about your financial risk and your risk management strategies. I think cybersecurity needs to be thought of that way versus show me the ROI, because you're not going to be able to do that until it's a reactive look. And that by then it's too late, right? So I think that's important for the leaders to understand that shift in thinking about cyber as well.
So talking about that ROI, and a lot of C-suite for any investment are asking about that. And when we look at PwC's 27th annual Global CEO Survey, most U.S. CEOs ranked exposure to cyber risk as a top 3 risk that their organization faces. How should the C-suite and the board be thinking about the approach and how they actually oversee, manage, and treat cyber risk, and compare that to some of the more traditional risks, which you just mentioned, right? When I look at the ops risk, when you talk about financial or legal, how should they be looking at that? Because I think a lot of boards and even C-suite members struggle with their approach here.
There's a couple of strategies that I think work, and that's really to, number one, establish real clear communication channels with the cybersecurity experts and leaders within the company. And that's lines of communication between the CISO, the executive leadership, and the board. It's not just going in there once every quarter and doing your 15-minute update, right? It's really finding the cadence and channels to keep the leaders and stakeholders and board up to date and informed on emerging threats, security incidents, not only within your organization, but maybe in the industry, and then also ongoing regulatory and security initiatives that you are working on. I think that education is really important. I'm not a fan of bringing in the board in for a tabletop exercise, but if it's a guided, facilitated conversation around a scenario or something, I think that helps people connect the dots, and then they can step back from it and provide a little bit more strategic thinking around risk management. So I think that's really important. The other thing that I would offer too is that the traditional treating cybersecurity separate, I really do think integrating cybersecurity into the overall risk management frameworks is really important. It needs to be, cybersecurity gets a lot of attention, right? It's everybody wants to talk about it, but it needs to be integrated into the standard risk management processes. And then where it doesn't make sense, that's where you make the changes. It can't be a separate thing because then people are like, oh, it's separate. I don't understand it. These people need to figure it out because I don't have it in my regular cadence and operating mechanism. So I think that's important to recognize and understand as well, too.
And what's the cadence, if you don't mind sharing with us at United? How often do you present in front of the board?
So I present to the board every quarter. So they're in the audit committee. So that's where we have cybersecurity risk management and oversight. We also do periodic updates to the board on a monthly basis in the board package. And then I have one-on-ones with the head of the audit committee, as well as the cybersecurity designated expert on our board to talk about things that are going on. It does two things. It helps them get educated and feel comfortable and ask questions in preparation for a larger discussion with the board, with the committee or the full board. But it also lets them have a conversation that we might not have in the boardroom. So they might want to talk about these specific things. And then again, it helps them connect the dots. They can advocate for me, my program, our approach when we're in the boardroom or we're in the full committee. So it really helps, I think, foster the awareness and the education and the confidence in not only myself and how me and my team are managing the risk holistically for United, but in the board's ability to understand and manage that risk from their responsibilities as the governance leaders.
That definitely sounds like a best practice. Are there any other recommendations or suggestions you'd give to other cyber leaders out there or management to improve that engagement?
The relationships are number one, right? It's really fostering those relationships and making sure that you are a trusted and confident expert, and that's how you're viewed. So spend the time to get to know people, the stakeholders, the leaders, the board members, and develop those trusted relationships. You do have a seat at the table. You're presenting to them at the board meetings or whatever other forum, but you have to make the extra effort to really take it to the next level and show that you are not only a subject matter expertise, but you understand how that connects to their concerns, to the business strategies, to the other goals, the business goals, and the outcomes that the overall company is trying to achieve.
So you just mentioned, I think, a really important point, and you were talking about the business strategy. And I think a lot of times, not only CISOs, but their organizations are always solving for technical challenges. Can you share how United's business strategy and customer experience actually helps inform and shape your cybersecurity strategy?
Sure. Yeah. We take a look at a couple of different things as we're shaping our cybersecurity strategy. Of course, number one is the threat environment. You have to understand what threats that translates into the risks that your organization is facing. So always having an eye on the current and evolving and emerging threats. But then if you take a look at the outcomes, right, the business environment, what are you trying to do as an organization? Are you trying to grow? Is it going to be inorganic or organic? The growth is going to be lots of mergers and acquisitions, which is a different approach and strategy than if you were saying we're going to grow organically, right? Where are you going to do business? Are they in trusted countries and locations, or is it in high risk markets because that's where the growth is? So all those things that a business leader would be thinking about around how they're developing their outcomes and what they're going to do, you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, yes, that's a market opportunity over here. And here I get what they're trying to do because they want to achieve these whatever XYZ outcomes. What are the risks associated with that? And then how do we mitigate those risks to enable those secure business outcomes? Not be the blocker to say, oh no, you can't do it there. Absolutely not. It's really, really understanding what they're trying to achieve. How do you mitigate that risk, whether it be a technology shift, an architecture shift, even working with your government affairs folks to look at regulatory influences and changing some of the ways that the regulations are looked at or had there. So it's important to be in those conversations and looking at your strategy from a business perspective.
So really like that enabling function, like you said, you're not the no stop.
That's right.
And you were mentioning, and United obviously is a global company. How are you looking at the geopolitical risk and everything happening around the world?
Yeah, so we partner again with our aviation security team, with our government partners as well too. We do a lot of work with our government partners to understand what those risks are, and then we appropriately adjust. Safety and security is number one in aviation, and it is a priority for everybody. So we take a look at what's going on in the world. We may adjust different things like Ukraine, Russia. Any U.S. airline is not allowed to fly over Russia, because when you fly over international airspace, you actually get charged, right? It's not free to fly over that.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So in essence, if you're flying over Russian airspace, you're sending money to the government. So we're not allowed to do that. So we adjust our flight routes and things like that to do that. But we're also monitoring from a cybersecurity perspective. Okay, if that business change is happening, what does that mean from a cyber perspective? And how do we increase monitoring or detection controls around some of those things that are happening? So as the business changes because of those geopolitical things that are happening, the cybersecurity risk, anytime there's kinetic things that are happening, there's cyber things that are happening, and we have to adjust as well too.
So one of the things I think, you and I hear a lot is about resilience. And I think we've become numb to some of the headlines that we see every day about X, Y, or Z company being breached. What do you think cyber's role is in promoting operational resilience? And maybe what are some of the steps that you're taking at United to really enable this?
So I think it's very important that we as cybersecurity leaders look at cybersecurity from a couple of different lenses. Of course, data protection, that has been a big focus for everyone, and it's been a primary focus for a lot of organizations. You don't want data to be exfilled, you don't want data loss, you don't want a data breach. We all need to be prudent and put the protective and detective controls in there to protect our data, our internal data, our customers' data as a priority. But there's also the resiliency factor, as you mentioned. For me and for our organization, uptime is key. We run a 24/7 operation that's very interconnected, not only from a technology perspective, but from an ecosystem perspective. We're dependent on thousands of organizations and people to get a plane safely from point A to point B. So that resiliency of not only United Airlines as being able to detect, respond, and recover from a cyber attack or a technology issue, but also our ecosystem, our partners that we depend on, and really managing that risk collectively. So we have a very strong collaboration with our partners, whether it be through threat and intel sharing with our aviation ISAC and other partners like that, to our own, we'll say, nth party risk management program, to developing one-on-one relationships with our key partners like our regional airlines. We need them to be just as strong and resilient as us. So I think it's important for us to do that. And then, of course, we also are looking at our cybersecurity strategy. And as the attacks evolve, right, from, okay, we're going to exfil data to destructive and disruptive attacks, what are the technologies that we need to put in place? If it's amping up our DDoS protection to a more robust capability to workload segmentation, I'd say, that looks at how we run the airline versus data categories is another concept that we're working on and implementing. So there's a few things that we're doing to make sure that we are able to reduce the impact of a cybersecurity incident, but also recover quickly and get back to normal operations as fast as we can.
Let me ask you a question here. Do you pay ransomware or don't pay ransomware? And I'm not talking about United. I'm talking about what's your perspective on that? A lot of companies out there want to sort of hear what, the general, where do you think the thought's going in this space?
My personal opinion is even if you pay the ransom, it's not the golden ticket, right, to recover
Not
from.
guaranteed anything,
Yeah,
right?
not guaranteed at all. Whatever circumstance. I mean, I think it's more of an art than a science, to be honest. I mean, you don't want to pay criminals. You don't want to feed into that system, right? And they can't be trusted. But if that is your only option, that's a tool in your toolkit to recover. Now, again, it's not the golden ticket. So I told my leadership, I told my board, I said, if we're in a situation where we decide to pay the ransom and we get the recovery keys, they're not guaranteed. And it's going to still be months of recovery, right? So it's an organizational decision based on probably the situation and context. I don't like the idea of paying ransom. I don't want to feed into that system, but it is an option for organizations as they recover.
All right. A podcast wouldn't be complete without talking about Gen AI. Talk to me about how you're thinking in your organization, the opportunities and the risks that you're facing.
Sure. Everyone's talking about Gen AI, and we are, from an airline perspective, we are a leader in digital innovation and capability. So we've been thinking about AI for a long time, and we use that in a lot of our tools and systems. And then Gen AI, we've been working on that as well, too. The number one thing that you have to think about that is, again, how do you integrate that risk assessment and understanding of AI and impact on the outcomes you're trying to generate into the framework that you have, right? So there's a lot of considerations. It's not just data privacy and security. It's model validation and testing. It's the skills and talent that you need to be able to create trusted Gen AI solutions and building security and governance into those solutions as a priority. So I think, again, it is a cross-functional and holistic approach. You have to have that holistic view to say, is this a problem we want Gen AI to solve? If it is it the right technology and the right approach to be able to solve that problem? What are the risks associated with it? And if we are saying this is where we're going to go, then what are the things that we need to do in place to make sure that is a trusted solution and transparent as well? Because if you're using it for customer facing solutions or even with your own internal adoption of these technologies, people want to trust the technology that they are using.
So as far as just integrating or implementing new technologies, are there any leading practices that you at United actually integrate into the process, or is there any advice you'd give our listeners?
I don't think there's anything new or unique. It's just hard to implement, right? And hard to operationalize, especially as the pace of technology is so iterative and consumable. Getting its security by design or privacy by design, all those things up front and integrated into the approach, not just when you start to develop the technology, but when it's an idea of what problem you're trying to solve. So if there's big initiatives, big kickoffs and things like that, the cybersecurity risks, data protection risks, privacy risks, all those things need to be in front and talked about at the inception and ideation, not when you're just starting to develop the solution. And I think that makes a difference. And it's hard to do. And to be very clear, as cybersecurity professionals, I don't think we're going to be in every single conversation, right? So pick the top 3 and call that success. Because I think as your leadership or stakeholders or even people doing the day-to-day work see that integration into the ideation, to the build, to the rollout, to the ongoing operations of whatever solution or problem you're trying to solve, makes it go faster, makes it more effective, makes it efficient, and makes it trusted. I think you'll see people start to say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense then. It actually is a better thing to do that up front. And then people start to change the way they work and think about those things proactively versus as a gate or a checkpoint in a process.
All right. Last question, Deneen, as we wrap up here. So you talked about sort of that enabling function. If you were sending a message to all the CEOs and board members out there, how can they actually help enable that CISO function in their organization?
I think really to be a sponsor or an advocate of the cybersecurity organization and leading from the top. If the board prioritizes cybersecurity risk management, then other leaders and executives pay attention to it. If the CEO does the same thing, and it's not, CEOs are busy. They have a lot of things to think about, right? Cybersecurity is not on the top of their list every single day, but when it is important, they're able to call that out and advocate for you and understand, or if they are able to connect the dots a little bit and pull you in to say, okay, well, I think this is something that you need to think about, right? I'll call that success, right? So I think being an advocate for cybersecurity when it is important to do that, not every single day, because I know everybody's busy, but when it's important, those leaders should be able to call that out and advocate for that program or that CISO and pull them in to make sure that they're getting the right outcomes and those risks managed.
All right, Deneen, it has been great talking with you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It was great to hear your input on this important topic for organizations. It really gave our listeners actionable insights to work into their own strategies. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of PwC Pulse. I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's conversation. You can leave a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Thank you for joining us on the PwC Pulse podcast. Subscribe to PwC Pulse wherever you listen to your podcasts, or visit pwc.com/Pulse podcast to hear our next episodes.
Copyright 2024 PwC. All rights reserved. PwC refers to the PwC network and/or one or more of its member firms, each of which is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.